You know how sometimes you find a really, effective way of doing something? It just makes you wonder what's actually going on underneath?
Yeah, what makes it tick?
Exactly. Well, we've got some fascinating materials for you today. It's mostly from an EMDR therapy handbook.
Now, hang on, EMDR, that sounds pretty clinical, right?
It does, yeah. It might sound like it belongs strictly in a therapist's office. But what we found looking into how EMDR works is that it offers these really surprisingly insightful parallels to something a lot of you probably enjoy.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What's the connection?
A successful podcast format. Specifically, think about something like Chapter Crunch,
Ah, okay. Yeah, they do great book summaries.
right? Engaging summaries, really practical, motivating takeaways from the books. They connect with the audience, and it all follows this, really clear structure.
Mm-hmm. So the mission for this deep dive then is to kind of explore the core principles behind why a format like that works so well.
Precisely. And we'll be drawing these maybe unexpected connections to the methods used in EMDR.
You might actually be surprised how these seemingly very different fields share some common ground,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to getting information across effectively and, keeping people engaged.
Okay, so let's dive in. First up, those engaging summaries. Chapter Crunch is brilliant at taking, sometimes really complex books and just distilling them down accurately, too.
Getting to the heart of it, yeah, without getting
Right.
bogged down.
Exactly. And it turns out there's a key idea in EMDR that kind of mirrors this. It's called the Adaptive Information Processing Model,
Hmm.
AIP.
Right, the AIP model. The basic idea there is that our brains are naturally wired to process experiences, like adaptively, to learn from them and move on. But
Yeah.
sometimes, especially with really distressing stuff, that processing gets uh, blocked or disrupted. The memories feel stuck.
Ah, I see. And they keep causing problems.
Exactly. So EMDR aims to kind of jumpstart that natural processing system again, to help integrate those stuck experiences in a healthier way.
So when you're summarizing a complex book really well,
You're essentially doing a similar kind of processing, right? But for the listener, you're taking all this complex information and sort of integrating it, making it more accessible, more understandable.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And EMDR isn't just a concept, it follows a really specific structure, doesn't it? 8 phases.
Yeah, a very structured approach. You've got history taking and treatment planning first,
Yeah.
then preparation, setting up a safe space,
Okay.
then assessing the triggers, the emotions involved. Phase 4 is the big one, desensitization and reprocessing the memory itself.
Right.
Then installing positive beliefs, a body scan to check physical sensations, closure, and finally reevaluation. It's quite systematic.
And when you lay it out like that, you look at Chapter Crunch, and it suddenly seems familiar structure-wise.
How so?
Well, there's that brief intro, gets you hooked.
Yeah.
Then the main summary, the key points. Then the practical insights, how you can use this stuff, maybe some memorable quotes, and a clear wrap-up at the end.
It's like its own set of phases, but for processing book information.
Exactly. It's almost uncanny.
And that structured approach in EMDR, it's all designed very carefully. Each phase builds on the last, creating safety, facilitating that processing.
So a podcast with a clear, predictable structure probably offers a similar kind of comfort or benefit for the listener, especially when trying to absorb new ideas.
I think so. That familiar framework, intro, summary, insights, conclusion, it really can help with comprehension, with making the information stick.
Okay, thinking about the content itself, phase 3 in EMDR, you said, is assessing triggers and emotions, really zeroing in on the specifics.
Yeah, like the specific images tied to a memory, the feelings, the negative thoughts or beliefs someone holds about themselves because of it.
Right. And for a podcast like Chapter Crunch, that feels a bit like identifying the core arguments of the book, doesn't it? Or the main emotional impact the author is going for, the key takeaways.
Absolutely. And EMDR uses techniques like Socratic questioning, asking targeted questions, or using imagery to really bring those core elements into sharp focus, similar to how a good summary highlights the most crucial parts of a book.
Then we get to phase 4, desensitization and reprocessing.
Okay.
That's where the bilateral stimulation comes in. Eye movements, tapping.
That's right. Eye movements, alternating taps on knees, or sounds in headphones, while the person focuses on that target memory, that difficult experience.
Now, the goal isn't to just, erase the memory, is it?
No, not at all. That's a common misconception. The goal is to reduce the emotional intensity, the distress associated with it, and to allow for cognitive restructuring.
Cognitive restructuring.
Basically, yeah, allowing the brain to reprocess the memory so it's stored in a more adaptive way. It becomes part of your history, but it doesn't hijack your present anymore.
Okay, so connecting that back, when Chapter Crunch presents a really complex idea from a book, but does it in a super clear, organized way.
Could that clarity, that structure be seen as a form of processing, helping the listener make sense of it, maybe reducing that feeling of being overwhelmed by dense information?
Huh. That's a really interesting way to put it, like breaking it down into manageable chunks, presenting it logically.
Hmm.
It's almost helping the listener reprocess the information into something more digestible.
Maybe the clarity itself acts a bit like that bilateral stimulation, helping the brain integrate the new info more smoothly. It's a compelling parallel.
It really is. And this also touches on something else important, accurately representing the source.
Definitely. The EMDR handbook is very clear about ethical stuff, like copyright, not modifying or distributing materials without permission. You have to respect the source.
Which is absolutely crucial for a podcast summarizing books, right?
Yeah.
You need to accurately reflect what the book actually says. Respect the author's work.
And maintain integrity.
Yeah. And thinking hypothetically, if Chapter Crunch tackled a book with, say, sensitive or politically charged themes,
Mm-hmm.
it would be really important, based on this parallel, to do what the EMDR principles suggest about neutrality. To just impartially report on the different viewpoints presented in the book. No taking sides, no injecting personal bias,
Yeah.
just acting as a neutral channel for the ideas in the source.
That's a critical point for maintaining credibility, absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Practical and motivating insights.
Yes, this is where Chapter Crunch really excels, I think. Taking book knowledge and showing you, okay, here's how you can use this.
And what's fascinating is that EMDR, while known for trauma, also has applications beyond that. It can be really useful for processing everyday stress, for personal growth,
How did that work?
by helping identify and process the maybe smaller memories or experiences that contribute to current stress patterns or anxious responses. It reduces their intensity.
Okay, so just like Chapter Crunch gives you those actionable takeaways.
The EMDR framework actually inspires a whole range of self-help techniques people can use for their own emotional well-being, things anyone could try.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, grounding techniques are a big one. Things like visualizing a genuinely calm, safe place in detail, using all your senses,
Okay, I can picture that.
specific breathing exercises you might have heard of, 4-7-8 breathing, or just deep diaphragmatic breathing. They really help calm the nervous system.
Right.
Also, using positive affirmations focused on safety and capability, engaging your senses directly, like holding an ice cube, sucking on a sour candy, focusing on textures around you, simple things to pull you into the present.
In creating a personal sanctuary. What's that?
It could be a physical space or even just a mental one that you cultivate as a go-to place for calm and safety.
Interesting. Are there others?
Yeah, the handbook mentions bilateral tapping, like
Yeah.
gently alternating taps on your knees or thighs. People use it for managing stress in the moment, working through emotional blocks, reducing anxiety spikes.
How does that work? Is tapping?
You'd typically focus on a specific issue or feeling while doing the alternating taps, then pause and notice any shifts in your distress level. There are also guided visualizations that might combine peaceful imagery with some form of bilateral stimulation and positive self-talk.
And even just eye movements.
Yes, simple, controlled horizontal eye movements done safely while focusing on a mild stressor can sometimes help the brain process it a bit differently.
Wow. So these techniques, they're all about emotional regulation, building resilience.
Exactly. They're the practical insights, the actionable steps someone might take away from engaging with EMDR principles. Very much like the practical value listeners get from a podcast like Chapter Crunch.
I also saw a section in the materials you shared called Turning Stress into Growth Opportunities.
Ah, yes, Chapter 15.3, I think.
That sounds exactly like the motivating angle Chapter Crunch often takes, framing challenges or new knowledge as pathways for development.
Mm-hmm. He talks about reframing stressful situations, looking for the learning aspect, embracing a growth mindset, believing you can develop your abilities, setting realistic goals based on what you're learning, improving problem-solving skills.
It's all about seeing challenges not just as obstacles, but as chances to grow, which is often a key message in the kinds of books Chapter Crunch covers.
Precisely. Now let's circle back to structure for a moment. We mentioned the clear flow of Chapter Crunch.
Intro, summary, application, conclusion.
And we talked about the 8 phases of EMDR. It's really striking how that structured therapeutic process could almost serve as a blueprint for a dynamic, well-organized podcast.
Yeah, the transitions, the logical sequence, It just makes the whole listening experience smoother, more engaging.
Definitely. And think about the end of an EMDR session. There's a specific phase called closure.
Right, you mentioned that. What happens there?
It's about carefully ending the processing, helping the person reorient fully to the present moment, maybe briefly reviewing what came up, using grounding techniques if needed to feel stable,
Okay.
reinforcing any positive shifts or beliefs, discussing self-care for after the session, even planning the next steps, scheduling the next meeting, offering encouragement. It's very deliberate wrapping up.
That sounds so much like what a good podcast conclusion needs. A clear summary, maybe a final thought to leave you with, reinforcing the main points, perhaps even hinting at future topics. It creates that sense of completeness.
Exactly. And then there's the reevaluation phase in EMDR. This isn't just a one-off session thing, it's ongoing.
What does that involve?
Monitoring progress over time. Are the symptoms actually reducing? Are there positive changes in behavior?
Okay.
Gathering feedback from the client, identifying any remaining issues, or setting new therapy goals.
That sounds like like what a podcast needs to do constantly, right? Assess its impact. Pay attention to listener feedback. Adapt the content, the format to make sure it's still relevant and valuable.
It's that feedback loop, that willingness to adjust and evolve based on results and input. Crucial for both therapy and effective media.
The EMDR Handbook also seemed to emphasize using things like analogies.
Yes. Like comparing the bilateral stimulation to REM sleep, the phase where we naturally process experiences during dreams, helps make a complex idea more relatable.
And vivid descriptions for exercises like the safe place visualization.
Exactly. Painting a clear picture. Those are exactly the kinds of communication techniques that make a podcast compelling, right? Clear explanations, relatable examples, storytelling. They make the information stick.
Totally. Finally, let's touch on connection interactivity.
Okay. Now, the EMDR handbook is obviously focused on the one-on-one therapeutic relationship, not a mass audience.
Right.
But it places a huge emphasis on the client's internal experience, encouraging self-reflection, journaling, noticing triggers, practicing self-compassion. You could almost see that as a form of internal interactivity that the therapy fosters.
Ah, that's a neat way to think about it. And that focus on internal reflection, encouraging the listener to think, okay, how does this idea apply to me? Maybe even suggesting they try a technique.
That could definitely inspire ways for a podcast to build external interactivity too, right?
Yeah.
Posing thought-provoking questions. Maybe listener polls related to the book's themes, encouraging sharing of experiences if appropriate.
It builds that sense of connection, of shared exploration.
And think about feedback in EMDR. The therapist is constantly observing the client's responses, nonverbal cues, everything. And the client is reflecting on their own internal shifts.
So that two-way street of feedback is vital.
Absolutely. Which just underscores again how important it is for podcasts to actively seek out and genuinely listen to audience feedback to make sure it's actually resonating, that it's meeting needs.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, it is pretty remarkable, isn't it? These underlying similarities between EMDR principles and what makes a podcast like Chapter Crunch so effective.
It really is. You've got that need for engaging, accurate content distillation.
Yeah, and the importance of practical, motivating insights people can actually use.
The value of a really clear dynamic structure that guides the listener.
And that fundamental need for connection, for reflection, whether it's internal processing or actual audience interaction.
It just goes to show, I think, how insights into effective communication and engagement can come from, well, seemingly unrelated fields.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The core principles of how we process information, how we connect with ideas, how we make them meaningful, they seem to pop up everywhere.
They really do.
It definitely makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Maybe
so-
consider how these principles we talked about processing, integrating information, like in EMDR, might actually be relevant to how you consume and learn from all sorts of media, including the podcasts you listen to.
Mm-hmm.
What information has really stuck with you lately? And maybe, just maybe, are there areas in your own life, your own thinking, where a little bit of reprocessing might actually be beneficial? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.